Hey students, good morning. So this is Monday, week 2, and I'm recording this little video to give you an overview of your assignments for the week, and also to talk about the readings for this week and introduce you to them. So I'm going to start by recapping what we did last week and what you should be doing for this week, and then I'll talk specifically about the readings. Last week, and I know some of you are new joining the class. You came in late last week, so you've got a little catch up to do. You were supposed to post, you were supposed to join the Slack. If you have not done that yet, please do it immediately. Then you were supposed to post a photo in the Slack Week 1 channel and an intro in the Slack Week 1 channel, text, audio link, video link, whatever you like. You're supposed to watch any videos I send out during the week. Those are both on Blackboard if you haven't watched them yet, and on my YouTube channel. And I'll include a link. I'm going to send out an email this morning kind of recapping everything for you guys. You were supposed to read 4 readings: Kipling, The White Man's Burden, Anderson in the Blackboard Course Back, my short story, Oceans Bright and Wide, and Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education. And then you were supposed to do a journal entry for each reading and 3 comments on your classmates' journal entries. So if you've done all that, you're caught up. If you missed one thing, you're allowed to miss 3 things over the course of the semester without it hurting your grade. So you don't have to stress about that. If you, so like you didn't post one of the journal entries, for example. But if you, if you do them all, then you'll have a little more slack available to you later in the semester. You were supposed to have everything in by midnight last night. It is the first week. There's a lot of tech issues. If you weren't able to do that for whatever reason, please drop me a note and let's talk about why that was. Is it a one-time thing? Is it going to be an ongoing issue? I want to be sure that we solve anything that is getting in the way of you participating fully asynchronously early in the semester. Okay, so I'm generally going to be the kind of professor who is pretty flexible if you talk to me. You have to be in communication with me. Otherwise, and I think especially in a virtual asynchronous class, the real danger is that it's easy for students to disappear. They just stop doing the work. I've taught asynchronously before, and there's a higher dropout rate generally, and I try really hard to avoid that. So I hope that you will not end up in that situation. It's a waste of your time, your money, your energy. So let's aim to keep everybody engaged and everybody finishing the course strong. And the key to that is being in contact with us. So on the Slack, also via email, also dropping in on the Zoom calls, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so that was last week. If you have any questions about that, you can drop it in the general Slack channel for week 1. That's a great place, or you can email me. If you at any point want to talk to your classmates about any of this, the hallway channel is a great place to, just as if you were coming in early to class and you were sort of hanging out, it's a great place to like exchange those little bits of information about, oh, what was it that was due today? That kind of thing. So I didn't understand this assignment. Often I spend a lot of time on the computer and I will usually be responding pretty fast, but I have chunks of time blocked off when I'm working on writing or helping my kids with their e-learning. So during those times, you may get a faster response from your classmates. So again, the hallway channel is a great thing to use for that. The random sort of icebreaker channel, I posted a question for week 2. So I encourage you to go and answer that if you feel like it. It's not a requirement. Okay, so week 2 assignments, post whatever you like in the icebreaker and hallway Slack channels. Watch any videos I send out during the week. I'm not sure if there will be any more right now, but this is, so you gotta watch this one. And then you've got 2 readings. One of them is pretty short. It's an opening chapter to Leaving India. And we'll be reading a few more chapters from this over the course of the semester. the author has very kindly allowed me to scan in and send you some chapters so you don't have to buy the whole book. The whole book is great, and if you have an interest in history at all, I strongly recommend it. Minal Hajratwala tells the story of the Indian diaspora through her family, who ended up leaving India over several generations and ended up in countries as diverse as Fiji, South Africa, America, certainly. So it's something like 6 generations and 7 continents. No, maybe not quite that many, but a lot. And she has a relative who marched with Gandhi on the Salt March. Just really well done stuff. She mixes sort of the history that she was able to research with family history details that she either knows or sort of speculates. So I think you'll find it pretty readable and engaging. So that's Leaving India. And this first chapter is really just sort of an intro to how she started working on this project more than anything else. So I think it's about 14 pages. The other reading is The Man Who Would Be King by Rudyard Kipling. So this is a short story. It's a little dense. It was made into a movie. So if you wanted to go hunt up the movie, The Man Who Would Be King, it's maybe a black and white. It's an older movie, but they did a good job with it. So that would be an interesting supplement. If you do, please, let us know. Post in the chat and tell us about it. The story is from the point of view of this guy who's a journalist. He is a colonial administrator, and he's really sort of a stand-in for Kipling himself. This is the job that Kipling, the man, had in the British colonial administration. And at the beginning of the story, he encounters these 2 con men who tell him about their scheme to blackmail these princes of India. And he's appalled and says, sort of thinks guys like these are just going to cause trouble for everyone, and actually, sends a message and gets them kicked out of the province that they're in. When he encounters them again, it is to hear the story of what happened to them after that. And they set out to become kings in India, and in a remote northern location, probably close to, I don't know, maybe Nepal or something like that. And it went very badly awry. So things you can think about as you're reading this is what led them into destruction? Why did they think that they would be able to so easily become kings in India? Is it internal flaws or external circumstances of colonialism or whatever else that led to things falling apart? Kipling is very concerned with morality. He's concerned with character. And when we were reading, hopefully when you were reading the poem, The White Man's Burden, that poem is sort of making a justification for an argument that because the white men are supposedly more civilized, have superior medicine, superior weaponry, certainly, it's their moral responsibility to help raise up the ignorant natives, is how he would talk about it. And whatever you think of that, and obviously I have some real problems with the whole enterprise. I think the sense I get from reading him is that he was sort of sincere, and that he thought this was probably a worthwhile thing, but because he was a colonial administrator and he saw on a daily basis probably the abuses of the system, I think he was constantly being faced with the flaws in it, and he is struggling probably throughout his life to reconcile those things. If you got interested in Kipling, I would recommend things like he wrote this novel, Kim, which is about a young boy with a white father and I think a Indian mother who is abandoned in India but then found and becomes a spy for the British government against the Russians in the Great Game. It's a great read. He also, you probably know him from Disney's Jungle Book, was based on his book for children, The Jungle Book. So, and again, you have a boy in the jungle there with animals, and you could sort of do an analysis of that, looking at how he represents those animals and what that might reflect about the way he thought about India. Okay, so that's a little bit of sort of framing for Kipling. Again, I think I said this in one of the earlier videos, a lot of people sort of dismiss him as a racist. And when we think about, is this writer racist? What I think about is, okay, are they basically of the same level of racism as everyone else in their time period? In which case I would sort of say, well, that's not great, but they're sort of a typical person, right? We are all, a friend of mine, Nala Hopkinson, who's an Afro-Caribbean Canadian writer, once said to me, racism is this sea of shit that we're all swimming in. And if you're swimming in shit, it's inevitable that some of it will stick to you, right? So we're all carrying around whatever racist, sexist, ableist, etc. ideas are in the air. And it takes real work to kind of decolonize your mind and start dropping some of those ideas, right? If we were in class right now, I'd be asking you to think a little bit about what are some ideas that you might have carried around with you that you maybe don't believe in anymore, that you think you should get rid of. So I'm going to be posting something like that as a question for you for this week's, as you're working through this week's reading. Actually, maybe we'll keep it for next week's icebreaker. That might be better. Okay. So slightly fraught icebreaker, but I think we can handle it. Then, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought for a second. Right, so if this writer, Kipling or whomever, is basically as racist as everyone around him, he's, I would say, okay, you're not a terrible person, you're not a great person, you weren't able to rise above, right? There are some writers who rose above, who looked around at their society, saw the problems in it, and tried to, and we see in their writing that they're trying to show people the difficulties. There's a lot of, we're gonna, actually not in this class, in my, when I teach American Lit, for one of the things we talk about are this whole era of writers that were looking at poverty in the cities and trying to expose that, or certainly like the abolitionist writers, right? Like Uncle Tom's Cabin was an attempt to persuade people of the evils of slavery, okay? So Kipling isn't that kind of writer. He's not clearly sort of a virtuous person rising above his station, his sort of like cultural circumstances. He's also not worse than everybody around him. Like occasionally you get people like H.P. Lovecraft is someone who in the science fiction fantasy community, we just actually changed the award that for horror that used to be a bust of Lovecraft's face to a tree because it was getting very difficult for Black writers like N.K. Jemisin, who were winning this award for being the best new fantasy and horror writer of the year, to then have to take this statue of this very racist man's face. And if you read Lovecraft's writing, whether you like the writing or not, it's pretty clear that he was quite racist, and much more racist than most of the people around him. And that's a lot of what fueled his horrific fiction. So if you've heard of Cthulhu, that's Lovecraft's invention. Okay, I'm almost done with Kipling. So basically the short version of this is that Kipling, I think, struggles. I would say that when you read Kipling, what you see in his work is he has this ideal of what he thinks the colonial project should be, but he's constantly confronted with the reality. And in Peachy and Carnahan, in the characters in The Man Who Would Be King, I think what you see is Kipling's fears. Like, these are the kind of men that we're setting out to like build the British Empire and help the natives rise up. Well, we're in real trouble if that's the case, because these men are morally bankrupt. They're terrible. Similarly, in that first poem, he has these lines about, if you do the job right, you're not going to get praised. You are going to get the hatred of those who you're trying to help, who say, you're trying to bring us away from bondage of our loved Egyptian night, is one of the lines, right? And so he's very aware of the tension there. He says, don't go seeking the easily proffered laurels. That's the laurels were the kind of laurel wreath that the Romans would put on the victors at the Olympic Games. He's saying, if you're in this for the praise, for the glory, for the wealth, that's the wrong reason to be out here, right? And that is, of course, the main reason why most of those young men came out there. If you were a young man in England, in the aristocracy, if you were the eldest son, the estate would be entailed to you, so you would stay home and manage the estate. If you were the second son, usually your father could afford to buy you a commission to be an officer in the military, and that gave you an income. If you've read any Jane Austen, or seen some of the movies, this might all be sort of familiar to you. If you were a third son, typically the priesthood was the past. Your dad would buy you a living as a minister, and you'd get a little house and a nice annual income and enough to support a wife, and you would write a sermon every Sunday, right? Not a hard life. If you were the fourth son, the fifth son, and remember, no birth control, so people had a lot of kids. My own mother was the oldest of 9, so families were big. There were a lot of kids to provide for, and there were not so many jobs as you went down there. Sometimes people went into business. They might go into law. They might go into something like accounting. But a lot of young men said, well, I want to get rich. I want to seek my fortune. I will go work in the colonies. And it was risky. There was disease. There was shipwreck. There was native uprisings, etc. But there was a good chance of coming home wealthy in 5 years or 10 years. And at that point, you could marry a beautiful British girl and set up your house and be okay. And of course, when you're in the colonies, there's all these native girls around to fool around with. You probably are not planning to actually marry any of them, although sometimes that happened too. That was usually a bit of a scandal. So that's the kind of man who would set out to do these jobs. And I think Kipling, what you see in his work is that he's pretty concerned that this is who we're entrusting our civilization, our government to. Okay, so that's my little intro recap for Kipling and the short story you're reading for this week. I think it's a pretty funny story if you can try and be patient with the prose, which is probably more formal and archaic than you're used to. This week, you only have to do 2 journal entries because there's only 2 readings, but I want you to write more comments. So last week you were supposed to write 3 comments on your classmate's journal entry. This week, aim for 5 comments. And the idea is, again, we're working towards having more of a conversation going back and forth. Yeah, I think that's basically it. Oh, and sorry, the last thing, this is important, is we're trying to set up these Zoom chats. So this is happening. It's going to take, I was hoping we could get those going this week. I'm guessing that I know a few of you didn't make it to the doodle, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you, even if you did fill out the doodle, the time that I assigned you to now no longer works. So I think this week we're gonna mostly be, just kind of like working out the logistics of that and trying to finalize it. By next week, week 3, by the end of week 3, I want to see each of you face-to-face for 5 minutes. And if that means that I have to do it at like 10 o'clock at night or 6 in the morning, because that's the only time that'll work with your schedule, that's what we'll do. I just think it's going to help a lot with cohesion overall, like being able to visualize each other will help with this class. So yeah, I'll write a little more about this in the Zoom, in the email that I'm about to send out to you. But the basic idea is by the end of week 3, you should have either dropped into one of the scheduled Zooms or set up a separate time to Zoom with me. I'm going to send along also some instructions on Zoom generally. I know there are, potential privacy concerns. I would love to see your faces if possible. Zoom has a virtual background option, so if you're not comfortable with showing your actual background, please feel free to use that. Generally, if we're in the Zoom call as a group and you want to have your video off, that's okay. It does make for not as great conversations, especially if it's 3 to 5 people and most of them have their video off. It just doesn't work as well. So if you can stand to have the video on, I recommend it. If you can't, at least setting a picture as your avatar so that we see a face rather than just a name on a black background, that would be great. I have gotten myself a green screen, so starting soon, I'm hoping to experiment a little bit with having some fun backgrounds on the back of these calls for myself. So, okay, I think that's it. I'm gonna talk to you guys soon. Good luck with the readings this week, and I'll see you on the Slack. Bye.